Welcome to the Mom Spectrum, where each week moms share their stories about motherhood, careers, and finding fulfillment. This show is to help moms feel more confident, because there are a million right ways to be a mom. I am your host, Stephanie Schindler. Okay, so first of all, thank you so much to everyone who has supported me and supported the podcast and listened and shared. It's really just been so fun to create this, and I've loved getting to share these stories with everyone. So I'm going to start with some exciting news. I am expecting baby number 2, and it's kind of funny. So I recorded all of the interviews before I started publishing them. So I had in mind that I just knew that if I tried to do it as I went, that I would kind of get behind and stuff. So it turns out it's really good that I did that, because I've been feeling pretty sick. And so I actually kind of regret that I haven't been able to do a little more with the podcast since it's gone live, but it's been fun doing what I have done. And so with that being the case, I'm not sure when season 2 will come out, but it will come out eventually, and I'm really excited for that. And along those lines, if you know of any moms that you would like to hear their story or think would be great to share their story, let me know, because I would love to interview them. Okay, so a little confession. I have tried to record my story probably 20 times, and every time I delete it. The big issue I kept running into is I kept trying to tell my story in this half-hour long format, and then I would think I'm only 2 years into this mom journey in a sense, and so most of my journey is unwritten still. So I'm going to share just a few little stories from being a mom, and then I'm going to talk about some of the insights that I feel like I've gained from talking to all of the moms I've talked to this season. The first experience I'm going to share, I studied business entrepreneurship at BYU in Utah, and I loved it. So I kind of went to BYU knowing I wanted to study that, and switched majors a few times, ended up back in it, and was very often the only girl in my classes, which I didn't mind. And it was a lot of fun. I mean, once I was into my entrepreneurship classes, I almost always read all my textbooks before class even started. And I just really loved it. So anyways, when I was in this program, I would get so passionate about what a great path entrepreneurship is for women. And I would get on my soapbox and be telling my classes about this. And they were all guys, and they were just all right, good for you. I just always thought that business entrepreneurship was the ultimate mom major. And this is my case. So organizational behavior prepared me to manage change and strong-willed individuals. That's been an ongoing theme in my motherhood journey so far. Supply chain prepared me to understand logistics, a key to any well-run home. Finance prepared me with skills to manage our money, which was especially valuable while I worked and managed our money, especially when my husband's education took us to 2 of the most expensive cities in the US. Marketing prepared me to be able to persuade my toddler to believe vegetables are so appetizing that she actually asks for them. Or at least ask for the smoothies that I sneak them into. And entrepreneurship taught me to find creative solutions to problems, which is the essence of motherhood. So yeah, actually, quite a few women have been very entrepreneurial and that I've talked to in this podcast. And so that's been a lot of fun, and it's always so exciting to me. But yeah, so that was kind of my background with work. And then I actually ended up doing marketing for most of my pre-baby career. But I do think that entrepreneurship was a great background for being able to kind of take control of my career and to guide it the way I wanted it to be. Okay, so I'm going to jump into becoming a mom. I think I kind of went into it with the wrong expectations. I was a bit older. I was in my late 20s, and so I just felt okay, I've done hard things. I mean, really young people get pregnant, have babies, and they seem fine, so I'll be fine. And it was we just had every single nursing problem you can think of. And yeah, it was rough. Okay, so when my daughter was first born, we had many issues, but primarily just nursing. And so, not issues that are uncommon to new moms. So we after we got to take her home, we had to go back for blood tests a few times to the hospital. And so while we were there, I was just having so much trouble with nursing. I stopped into the lactation center and I asked if anyone's there that could help me. And I think I actually started crying in there, and they were like, sorry, there's no one here, but like take this number. And then I was like, okay, thanks, and left. And I remember just sitting in the lobby and just like sitting there and crying. And which anyone that knows me well knows that when I lose sleep, I just cry a lot. So that was pretty much how our first 3 months went. But yeah, so I'm just like sitting there crying, and this lady that was helping me in there, she comes out and she like had gotten all these papers together that she thought would be helpful. And she just gave me this huge hug. And she was just this perfect stranger that didn't know me at all, but saw that I was in need of help. I just look back at this experience with this stranger who, she didn't have to do that. And it was such a small thing, but it made such a huge impact. And I share that in part to say it was just so hard at the beginning, and also to say like how much of a difference it makes when you help a new mom. I think that it's just one of those times in life where it's like especially hard to ask for help. Maybe that was just me, but I was not good at asking for help. And I think that one of the hard things was that we had moved so much. And so we had only lived in Pittsburgh for like not even, maybe about 6 months. And then when my daughter was 3 months old, we moved to New York City, and then we moved again 3 months after that. So it was really hard to build a support, like to build a network. And but yeah, I just look back at that experience and am just like so grateful. And I feel like it's just, I don't know, a good thing to like know that there are people that care, and to be willing to accept help, especially at the beginning, because it is hard. and it's hard to prepare for the unknown. Like, I mean, when you're pregnant the first time, I feel like it's so common. You like read all the books and all of that, but it's just so different when you're in it. So anyway, our second big move, after New York City, we moved to California, and we were in Silicon Valley. So I took 6 weeks of maternity leave, which in America was like very generous of my company to give me. So I had 6 weeks unpaid maternity leave. And then after that, I was like kind of hoping to get more. And they were like, yeah, well, as long as your work is done. And I was like, well, okay, so like either I can do the work and not get paid, or get paid. So, okay, I'm just going to like go back to work. And so I only went back 10 hours a week. And I had asked people before, like, 6 weeks later, 10 hours a week, am I going to be okay? And they're like, oh yeah, of course you'll be fine. And it was so hard. And again, with poor expectations, I totally thought like, oh, babies sleep like 20 hours a day, but like my daughter definitely didn't. And when she did, it was in like 10-minute increments. So it was really hard to get work done. And like, I was definitely still recovering physically. And so yeah, it was just like very hard to be as productive as I had been previously. Like what I could get done in 10 hours was not the same as before I had a baby. So yeah, so I made that decision, and I always knew that I wanted to focus on my daughter. So it was easy for me to make the decision to go to 10 hours a week. We didn't have family around, and I didn't really want to do daycare. So it seemed like a reasonable choice. But looking back, I'm like, wow, I definitely should have just like gotten care for that extra 10 hours, and it would have been like life-changing. But anyway, so we went to Silicon Valley, and I was very intimidated before we got there, and I felt like, oh, people are gonna like look down on me because I have like stepped away from my career, and this is like career women central. So it's very interesting to move there and find that there was just a very wide variety of choices that women had made. And it was really inspiring. So, I mean, there were full-time caregiving moms. There were moms that were like super into their career. And then there was just everything in between. People who had found flexible options where they were either remote part-time or like half in the office, half home. I mean, there were just really all sorts of different things. And people were just like really accepting and like very interested in what everyone else was doing in like a very open and positive kind of way. And so I just like loved talking to all these women, and maybe I mentioned it was people from all over the world. So we used to I had this little map in my journal that I would write down like all the countries that we had met people from. So that was a lot of fun too. And it was cool to see like so many different perspectives on motherhood. So like a lot of people had parents who would come from their home countries for like 3 to 6 months, or like even I met a few people who like their kids would just like their little babies would go home with their parents to other countries for a few months. And that was just like standard in their culture. So that was really interesting to see as well. But yeah, I would say that was actually, I mean, this idea of sharing mom stories has been in my mind for a long time, but that was kind of when it solidified, like, oh, I'm around all these cool people, I should take advantage of it. And and of course, like by the time I started getting going, we moved again. So we actually live in Montreal, Quebec now. So it's funny, when I moved to California, I anticipated a lot of judgment and like a strong work focused culture there, and it was not necessarily the case. And then when I moved to Montreal, I kind of thought like, okay, I'm just gonna like go to the park. So and we happened to live next to really awesome parks, and I made this amazing friend group in California, and so I thought like, okay, I'll just go do the same thing in Montreal. And then I was surprised to find that because so many women do work, that like there weren't a lot of moms at the parks, at least not when I was going in the middle of the day. And so it was like a lot of daycares, and I ended up like becoming friends with a nanny and so we would go do things together. And so it was interesting going to Montreal because there's a really strong daycare culture there. Like everybody puts their kids in daycare, and so people, when I first moved there, and it seems a little bit less so now, but everybody was like, why isn't your daughter in daycare? And I mean, she was only just barely a year old at the time. And it was like very much like, well, why aren't you socializing her? Like, you're going to hold her back. And it's a funny thing because, I mean, I just always felt like I can't even fathom like saying the opposite to someone. Like, how could you put your kid in daycare? Which I know that so many working moms do get that judgment. And it's just, I mean, it's just so inappropriate to ever place that judgment on anyone. And it's, I mean, it's like it's a very painful thing to have judged. Like being a mom is just so much vulnerability. Yeah, it's very frustrating to be judged, especially because there's just so many factors that go into each woman's decision. And so I mean, and that's another reason that I felt prompted to move forward with the podcast, because I thought I think a lot of people need more insight into how to make decisions. And so another thing with making the decision to do this is that, especially with all the amazing moms in California, I feel like so many people had found like really great options, but it was still really hard to feel really confident about the choices they had made. Would question, I mean, you know, wherever they were on the spectrum, they would question like, am I spending enough time with my kids? Am I ignoring my career and it will be to my detriment later? And I mean, all sorts of things that, of course, we all face as moms. But I do hope that by listening to other women's stories and also by self-analyzing a little bit, we can be more confident. I think because it's such a vulnerable thing, it's easy to feel like, I just like don't even want to think about it. I just want to like, I'm going to move forward with this choice. But I think that actually as you analyze, as you do pros and cons, and as you test, I mean, like the reality is that sometimes you just have to like be on a path for a while before you can really figure it out. That like, then you'll feel that much more confident about the choice you've made. So that's kind of my story. And then I'm going to share some insights as well. Okay, so one of the things that I found interesting in interviewing moms for this was that actually more women than I expected seemed to just know what was going to work for them. And it's funny because for me, I don't think I necessarily did. Like I kind of thought I did. And then once I became a mom, it kind of changed. And so like I mentioned, I was working 10 hours a week. And then when we moved to Montreal, I actually stopped working completely. And it was interesting. I thought I had always wanted that. And then it was actually really hard. And I think part of the reason it was hard is because I had kind of built a part of my identity around like, well, I'm a mom, but I'm still working. And it was kind of this pride thing. And it was hard to give that up. Like I realized like soon I'm not going to be able to tell people that, oh, and I also work. So yeah, I do think it's interesting that some people do just know. But I will say that it's great once you've found a path to seek out like-minded people that can support that. I was thinking of this analogy that I wouldn't go to my dentist for hair advice, but that doesn't mean that he's not great at his job. So we all are on a different path, but like you need to get support from the right places, and kind of going along with that. So I think that, and I don't know if this is an American culture or just like everywhere culture, but I do feel like so finding the right path, it doesn't always mean that it's the easy or the comfortable path, but it doesn't mean an unnecessarily hard path either. And I think that as women or as moms, we get into this competition for who has it harder, whether it's like, oh, it's harder to be a working mom, or it's harder to be a stay-at-home mom, or like my specific situation is so much harder. And I think some of that is just like wanting some understanding and like seeking that like confirmation a little bit. But I also think, like, I was having such a hard time trying to balance being a full-time caregiver and working. And it was like, at the time I did feel like it was necessary to work. My husband was in school. But at the same time, I sometimes think that we seek out, well, my path is harder and I'm going to make it hard because that gives me value. But I don't think difficulty should be value. I think doing the right thing and doing what's right for you should be what's valuable. Okay, so going off of that comparison, I feel like this is just like the biggest theme of motherhood these days, where there's just so much comparison, so much judgment. And you know what? I actually think that has changed. But the fact that it still exists is like one of the things that made me want to interview different moms. So it's funny. In thinking about this, I think, like, I actually love talking to people about our differences. And so I think sometimes we don't want, like, it seems like maybe politically incorrect or something to talk about differences, but they're so interesting. Like, I feel like that's what makes life so interesting. And so I appreciate that there's a big difference between recognizing differences and then like comparing the value. So I think there's something very powerful in recognizing that two different people can take two different paths and they can both bring value to themselves, but you don't need to worry about, you know, which one's more valuable or like comparison in that way. And I think this is like something else that has been a common theme is talking about that like Instagram perfection and how we like see this fakeness in Instagram and it's easy. And I see this a lot. I see people all the time like, oh, well, like it looks so perfect, but behind the scenes, like this negative thing and this negative thing. And the thing is, like, what if there's not that negative thing? I mean, if you know, creating pretty pictures on Instagram is what brings someone joy, then like, why shouldn't they? I think that that's an easy place to see where there's kind of this unhealthy comparison. And I mean, gosh, there's a lot you could talk about with social media. I don't think it's particularly healthy, but I also think that like getting worked up and like judging it so harshly is not particularly healthy either. And I think too, when we judge other people and we're nitpicking what other people are doing, it's a habit that you can't stop and you start doing it to yourself. So if you want to be less critical of yourself, you have to be less critical of other people. Okay, jumping back a little bit, I'm going to touch a little bit more on that like competition for difficulty. I think too, like some of this is just complaining, and I mean, I think there's a space and a time for complaining, but I also think that sometimes there's like this social pressure to be unhappy, and like dissatisfied even. And so I don't think this is unique to motherhood at all. In fact, this is something that I would say that I first noticed when I was in college. And so I had this really amazing experience to study in the Middle East, and it was very eye-opening in a lot of ways. And one of the ways was how much effort a lot of people there went through to make sure that they were getting a good education. So when I went back to university in Utah, I realized how often people just complained about school And with this new perspective, it was like, wow, we are at this incredible university and, you know, just so many amazing opportunities. And for a lot of us, I mean, we had low tuition costs, low living costs in Utah, and amazing professors. I mean, just really, like, there was so much positive there, but like all people talked about was like complaining about this test or like complaining about this class being so hard. And so I think because I had realized like how much people valued education in other places, whereas where I was coming from, people just like saw it as something to complain about. It was like, wow, why are we complaining about this? Like, why is this just like the natural tone of conversations? And so I kind of tried to change the way I talked about it. But I think it totally happens in motherhood, and not that there's not a lot to complain about because it's really hard. But I think sometimes there's even like a social pressure to talk about like how hard it is, and not necessarily to like talk about the things that are good. And then like going along with that, I think sometimes we like try to make life hard on ourselves. I remember one time my husband was going to work and I must have like said how tired I was or something. And he was like, well, don't you just nap when our daughter naps? And I was like so offended that he thought I napped. And then I was like, wait, why don't I nap when our daughter naps? Like, and so I like started taking naps more and I was a lot happier and I was more patient with our daughter. And it's funny because I mean, everything was still pretty much getting done, all the necessary stuff. I mean, obviously something has to budge. I don't believe that like time just stretches to do all the same things, but I mean, sometimes we make lives a little harder on ourselves than we need to, or maybe it's just me. So one of the other things I have thought a lot about is receiving advice as a mother. And I feel like this is something that people are like pretty against because sometimes it feels judgmental. But when I became a new mom, I was like, why didn't anyone tell me anything? Like people are so hesitant to give advice. And I thought, I wish people would have given me more advice. But I think that, so here's the thing. I think it's easy to take advice as judgment or like it can feel like a burden and that, oh, that's just like something else I need to do or something. And I have kind of come up with this idea that you should think of all advice as a hypothesis, not a true principle that's equally true to everyone. So that advice worked for someone. It might not work for you, but the only way to know is to test it. And sometimes you don't have to know to test. Like sometimes you don't have to test it. You know it's not going to work for you. It's not your style. It's whatever. But yeah, I do wish that like we could talk a little bit more openly about advice and not like internalize that as like, oh, this is the golden standard. This is what all women should be doing. This is what all moms should be doing. Okay, and then the last thing I'm going to talk about. Okay, throughout interviewing all of these moms, I tried to pull from a decently diverse background, different religions, different geographic locations, and like different experiences as moms. And one thing that I feel like, whether it was talked about or not, or just or it's just my impression, is that there is an undeniable spiritual aspect of motherhood, and being a mom is just such a different experience than anything else you can do. And the world wants to take everything at face value, but once you've experienced motherhood, you know that it's just something different. And I mean, I just feel like there's so much politics and labels and judgments that get in the way, but at the end, it's such this like divine, spiritual, individual thing, and there's just so much more than meets the eye. But yeah, I'm going to just kind of sum up there because obviously I could go on all day with this. But again, thank you so much to everyone. It's been such a joy creating this, and I am really excited to start creating season 2, and I will keep everyone posted on when that will be coming out. Again, if you have any feedback or any recommendations, I would love to hear it. I'd love to connect with anyone. So yeah, reach out. I'd love to be in touch. I'd love to connect. And thank you so much to everyone.